I guess we're doing it this way. Hello, welcome, how do you do? My name is Rachel and this is Miss Betty. And welcome to my new channel, or repurposed channel. At the time of filming this, I actually haven't decided yet if I'm going to repurpose my old channel or not, so I guess when this goes live, we will have that answer. Regardless, this is not my first rodeo on YouTube, but this will be a very different type of content than anything I've made in the past. Okay, you're gonna have to get down. I love you, but you're really heavy. I can't do this whole video with you in my lap though, and I need to use my hands. I need to be able to wave my hands around, okay? Okay, get down. I've been wanting to post new content for some time, but of a more personal nature. Vlogs, story times, videos of my outdoor adventures, things like that. Limited editing, raw and uncensored. For monetized channels, there are a lot of rules about appropriate content, language, specific words that you can't use, but there are some topics that I think more of us should be talking about. Situations, experiences, sometimes trauma, that is often stigmatized or makes people feel ashamed even when it shouldn't. I don't care about monetization because one, I don't want to be limited in how I express myself, but two, this just isn't about money. It's not about subscribers or views. It's about owning my story, telling my story, keeping my friends and family updated, and sometimes just getting shit off my chest. If a story like the one I'm telling today helps someone identify toxic behavior and manipulation and helps get them out of a potentially dangerous situation, then it's worth it. So on that note, get yourself a glass of wine, maybe a cup of tea, because we're gonna be spilling it. And you're probably gonna want a snack too, because this story time is gonna be long and it's gonna be a doozy. Really? You have to go outside right this second. I literally just sat down. Why can't y'all all go out at the same time? I'm trying to tell a story here. Okay, before we actually get into the story, let's take a second and talk about my outfit. Yes, I'm in pajamas. It is 8:30 p.m. on a Friday night. I have a full face of makeup on, but you know what? It's snowing outside, and you know what? For a story like this, I just needed to get comfy, okay? I just want to be at home in my warm house in front of the fire in my cozy 3 times too big for me pajamas. It is what it is. I had thought about getting all cute for this, but nah. In all seriousness, some of this video will get a little bit heavy. It might be obvious from the title, but in this video I'll be talking about some potentially triggering content such as narcissistic and emotional abuse, manipulation, violence, and brief mentions of sexual assault and child abuse. If the discussion of any of these topics are harmful for you or are simply too much for where you are in your mental health journey, I would definitely recommend skipping this video. All right, as many of you watching know, I used to have a channel named Creative Adventures where I pretty much just tried all kinds of new crafts and hobbies. The goal was to inspire others to just get out there and create and learn along with me. But after my divorce in 2018, I made the conscious decision to really just let the channel die. But I mean, I never stopped creating. In fact, I have even more hobbies now. I just stopped filming it. For one, filming things like making soap or decorating cakes, it's honestly just a pain in the ass. Between the camera setup and trying to time things perfectly, the hours of editing, it was exhausting. I work a very busy full-time job, and the reality was trying to film my creative adventures was actually taking a ton of time away from being able to be creative. 2, I went through a period of depression. I recognized fairly quickly what was happening, and in early 2019, I got myself back into therapy. Now, I 100% recognize how privileged I am to have access to and the means for mental health care. But I was also doubly privileged because I found an amazing therapist right out the gate. We just clicked. We did a type of psychotherapy called EMDR, or this is so hard to say, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. I don't know why I have such a hard time with that word, but I do. EMDR is most often used to help people heal from past trauma that has resulted in PTSD, anxiety, and other symptoms like that. And let me tell you, I don't know what I expected, but it certainly was not what I got. I have been through years of therapy, okay? But I had never really had a breakthrough. But I did with EMDR. I went to this therapist to deal with situational depression that resulted from the failure of my marriage. What we ended up treating was childhood trauma. There have been very few times that I've cried in therapy, and even when I did, it was, just some sniffles, nothing big. I was able to hold it together. But in the middle of my first EMDR session, it was like I was on another planet. I was just sitting on this woman's couch, sobbing my eyes out, and there was no controlling it. I could not stop it once it started. But immediately after, I felt light. And I know that sounds cliche, but hear me out. It was like I had been carrying around a heavy bag of rocks my whole life. And I finally realized that those rocks were useless. I didn't need to carry that bag around with me. I could just set it down on the ground and move forward. Something deep inside of me changed that day. And I bring all of this up because it is important to the story. I have a history of codependency. I am a fixer. I am a people pleaser. I have a hard time saying no, especially to people that are important to me. This was actually something that I brought up with my former therapist, but she never really gave me the tools to do anything about it. After EMDR though, I learned to say no. Shout out to all of my friends out there who have asked me for something in the last couple of years and have been shocked when I've been honest and said I did not have the time. In the past, I would have just done it, even if that meant sacrificing something that I truly needed to do for myself. But most importantly, I learned to truly value myself for the first time in my entire life. For those of you that know me in real life or remember my Creative Adventures videos, you've probably noticed that I've lost a lot of weight. Now, granted, it's hard to tell when I'm wearing pajamas that are 3 times too big for me, but these are pajamas that I used to wear before I lost all of the weight. They're still comfortable, but I know it's hard to tell that I've lost any weight. But I've actually lost about 60 pounds. I'll probably do a video on that at some point, but after that breakthrough, I actually started to love and value myself. And in January of 2020, I realized that I valued myself so much that I actually wanted to take better care of myself, not just emotionally, but physically too. Learning to value myself is also why I stayed single for 3 years following my divorce. I just wanted to. I enjoy my own company now. I decorated and organized my house exactly the way I wanted. I built the perfect routine for me and my dogs. I watch whatever the hell I want on TV, even if that means watching Buffy seasons 1 through 7 in order for the 14,000th time. I buy whatever I want. I eat whatever and whenever I want. I don't owe anyone anything, and my decisions are mine and mine alone. Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't miss companionship. I did, but at the same time, I could not fathom sharing my personal space with someone else. The idea of someone bringing in different artwork or furniture, or me having to make space in my closet for someone else's clothes, or having to watch their stupid shows on TV. Nope, not interested. Over that 3 years, I learned that I love living alone. What was that? The fuck was that? I also have a ghost, but that's a whole nother story. I'll probably do a video on that one day too. So, how in the hell did I end up in a whirlwind relationship that culminated in someone moving in with me after just a few months? And don't worry, I will get to why that is in air quotes. I'm going to use a pseudonym for my ex throughout this video. We'll call him Andrew. I don't think I've ever dated an Andrew, so that should be a safe name. And let me just go ahead and give a bit of a disclaimer here. I am telling my story as I experienced it. Conversations that I referenced throughout this video, ones that I wasn't a part of, are obviously hearsay. I'm relaying them as they were told to me, but I don't have any way to validate their legitimacy. Otherwise, my thoughts, opinions, and emotions throughout this video are mine and mine alone. With that out of the way, the simple answer as to how I ended up in this situation is narcissism, specifically vulnerable, or what is often referred to as covert narcissism. Now, I am quite familiar with narcissism. When Trump became president, regardless of your feelings about him, that's really when narcissism started to enter the common lexicon. I remember seeing articles and news segments talking about narcissistic traits and narcissistic personality disorder. But thanks in part to my years in therapy, I was actually already pretty well versed at that point. I am a narcissist magnet because of my specific personality traits, such as being a people pleaser. I've been a member of forums for healing from narcissistic abuse for over a decade, but I was only ever familiar with that kind of classic overt brand of narcissism. It's the most common. It's what most people know. We generally think of narcissists as charming and gregarious and extroverted. Covert narcissism is a whole other beast, and it actually wasn't until mine and Andrew's relationship ended that I truly understood what had happened. And to be clear, I am not diagnosing Andrew as having NPD. There are very clear guidelines for diagnosing any mental health condition or personality disorder. But there is a difference between a diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder and identifying that someone is a narcissist or has narcissistic personality traits. Later in this video, I'll actually talk about how I pieced all this together, but let's just start at the beginning of the story. It's gonna be a long night. Losing 60 pounds opened up a whole new world of physical activity for me. Part of how I lost weight was simply by moving more and walking several miles a day with my dogs. But I've also always loved hiking, so in the spring of 2021, I started doing more of it. I often post pictures on Instagram of my outdoor adventures, and I also usually tag the city that I'm in, and I assume that that's how he found me. Andrew started following me on Instagram in early June. At first, he just liked some of my posts here and there and never really interacted beyond that. But then one Saturday afternoon in late June, I posted a selfie of me out on a trail behind my house. And shortly after, he slid into my DMs. Now, to be fair, it wasn't anything creepy. In fact, it was probably the most non-creepy message I've ever gotten. He simply asked me if I liked rock climbing. So, of course, I hopped on over to his profile to see what he was all about. He was attractive, pretty smile. He was obviously an outdoorsy type. He had lots of photos of him rock climbing, ATVing, rafting, things like that. But his photos were really, very good. I'm obviously an artistic person, and I appreciate good work. So the photos are probably the first thing that truly drew me in. Anyway, I didn't respond, at least not immediately. Ever since moving to Colorado, I spend every Saturday evening over at my brother and sister-in-law's house, Rob and Evelyn. They are two of my best friends. We're very, very close. So that night, I was showing them his profile and talking about the message and telling them how torn I was on responding. On one hand, dude's a complete stranger, right? But on the other, he seemed really interesting and active, and hey, at least he's not some rando sending me vulgar messages and dick pics, right? The bar is real low, guys, real low. But also, everyone is a stranger until you meet them. Ultimately, I decided that responding to it wasn't really all that different from responding to a stranger on a dating app, right? It's the same damn thing. So I decided to go for it the next day. And it was nice, I suppose. Listen, I am not a person that enjoys chatting online or via text or even on the phone. I am a face-to-face kind of girl. I turned off messenger notifications years ago. There's only a handful of people that I will even respond to text messages from. I don't like it. I don't enjoy it. So I'm just not gonna do it, okay? It is what it is. Given that, spending my afternoon exchanging messages with this dude on Instagram was way outside of my comfort zone. But it was nice. It was fine. It was fine. We chatted about outdoorsy stuff, my weight loss, because I have documented that on Instagram, so he had seen it. And other like adventurous things we'd always wanted to try. And of course we covered like the basics, you know, age, what we do for a living, that sort of thing. The conversation eventually turned to meeting in person. That was the whole point, right? I actually had always been interested in trying rock climbing. It was one of those things where I just kind of admired people from afar. I'd see climbers while I was out on my hikes and I would just think, oh, there's like no way I'd ever be able to do that. It looks terrifying. So the idea of doing exactly that was really, really exciting. He was a member of a climbing gym downtown and asked me if I'd be interested in meeting him there so that he could quite literally show me the ropes. It sounded fun. Besides, public place, non-romantic, great. And bonus, there's like a little restaurant, cafe thing right inside next to the gym so that if things went well, we could get dinner. Count me in. The first of many red flags that I didn't notice at the time would appear in that very first conversation. And just to make this painfully obvious, I'm going to wave this actual red flag every time one happens. I feel like this should be a drinking game. I'm gonna go get a glass of wine. BRB. Watch, I'm gonna have like red wine-stained teeth by the end of this video. For real, y'all probably aren't gonna wanna try to make this a drinking game because y'all gonna get sloshed if you do. Okay, where were we? The longer we chatted, the more Andrew started to bring up the potential for future dates. Now remember, this is literally the first time we had ever talked. He asked if I'd be interested in going rafting with him or climbing outdoors if I really enjoyed climbing in the gym, or if I'd be up for a barbecue out at his cabin. I thought it was presumptuous, but I also just kind of took it as him feeling me out to see if we'd be into the same kinds of things. So I went with the flow of the conversation. I know now that this is actually a narcissistic dating strategy called future faking. According to an article by Dr. Eleanor Greenberg, future faking is a courtship strategy in which narcissists talk to you in elaborate detail about all the wonderful things that the two of you will do together in the future. All the while, they sound very enthusiastic and sincere. What makes it future faking and not just planning a future is that none of this is likely to ever happen. So at one point, Andrew said, "I take it you're not married." Weird one, but no. I explained that I was divorced and have been single for the last 3 years, and I pretty much left it at that and then asked him the same question. I like itches because, you know, it's winter in Colorado and it's dry AF here. Okay. He told me this in-depth story about how he'd had one serious relationship since he'd moved here. She had kids. He put all his eggs in one basket and she shattered it. He talked about how it was winter when they split up and he was tired of being stuck at home in the cold, and that's what pushed him to finally try climbing, even though he was deathly terrified of heights and introverted and shy and blah, blah, blah. It was a lot of information for a first conversation, like seriously. So he talked about how he'd tried some dating apps after that, but his experiences there were terrible. And I point all of this out because the way he framed it, I believed that this long-term relationship had been like a year or more earlier. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. Oh, God. Just you wait, man. The story's gonna get wild, y'all. As we wrapped it up, we finalized our plans for that first date to the climbing gym. The next weekend was the July 4th holiday, and I had Thursday and Friday off. He was leaving for a rafting trip on Friday, so we planned to meet up on Thursday afternoon. I had no idea what to expect, right? I've never done this. So like, I needed to know if I should wear a specific type of clothing or shoes. Did I need any kind of equipment? Did I need to go, buy some piece of equipment and take it with me? I didn't know. So we talked about all of that, and then he asked me how tall I was, which I thought was odd. He told me he needed to know since he would be belaying me on top rope. Like, he needed to make sure we were compatible sizes or something. Knowing what I know now about climbing, that was a crock of shit. But without me asking, I did not ask. Without me asking, he then told me he was 5'6". For reference, I am 5'5". So, okay, shorter than any guy I've dated before, but whatever. Remember this, because it will come up again later. Over the next couple of days, we chatted a few more times, we exchanged phone numbers, all that good stuff. I don't remember a lot of in-depth conversations or anything, but he asked if I'd be interested in meeting before the rock climbing date so that, we could kind of get to know each other in a less hands-on kind of way. He suggested bowling, which surprised me because I love bowling. I'm terrible at it, but I love it. So we decided to meet up the afternoon before, Wednesday, at an alley near my house. And then we would just play it by ear from there. Cool. So the night before our date, he texted me. He asked if he could call me to talk on the phone. Okay, I guess. I've already told you all my feelings about talking on the phone. Chatting via messenger and text is already outside my comfort zone. But, this was my first date in a decade. And hey, listen, you know what? Okay. You kind of have to keep this in mind throughout this whole story because it explains a lot about why I let so many things slide. I was with my ex-husband for a total of 7 years, and then I was single for 3 years. It had literally been a decade since I'd been on a first date, or dated, period. Out of practice, understatement. So I agreed to the phone call. What I wasn't prepared for was for him to switch to FaceTime on me in the middle of the call with no warning. Who does that? Who does that? It was a Tuesday evening and I was plopped on my couch, post-workout, no makeup, dirty hair. Dude, that was not how I wanted to meet for the first time face to face. Like, seriously. Who does that? I was super annoyed, but I think I played it off pretty well, I guess. So come Wednesday, I was pretty on edge. My intuition was telling me that something was just off about those first few conversations. People, listen to your gut. Just listen. On top of that, I was still put off by that whole FaceTime debacle, but I still got cute. I put on a smile and I headed out to the bowling alley. He got there first and had already gotten a lane for us. I walk in and not what I was expecting. His face looked just like his pictures, but I already knew that since I had talked to him on FaceTime. But he definitely lied about his height. He was a small dude. And I don't just mean short. He was gaunt. Even in regular tennis shoes though, I was taller than him and I had at least 25, maybe 30 pounds on him. And remember, I've lost 60 pounds. I'm currently within my ideal weight range for my age and height. I was immediately turned off, but this made me waffle between feelings of guilt for being petty and annoyed that he misled me. I think I did a good job of masking my surprise, but seriously, who lies about their height? Like, do you think I'm not gonna notice? But I thought, who knows? Maybe he's just insecure about it. Maybe the evening will go so great and I'll be able to look past it. I mean, it's a superficial thing, right? But seriously, who lies? Who lies about their height? That's something that you can't really fake. At some point, I'm gonna see you without shoes on, and I'm gonna know. I'm gonna know the truth. And it was pretty good for a first date. Now, I don't know if that's saying more about this particular date or my prior ones, but still. We couldn't make a ton of conversation while we were bowling, but the conversation that we did have was lighthearted and good. He brought his own bowling ball, which I thought was weird. He was good at bowling, but like for a first date, you're really gonna bring your own ball and try to show your date up? He kept like trying to make bets with me too, like on the games. He was very competitive about it, even after I explicitly told him that I'm not a good bowler, I am not competitive in any sense of the word, and that I just wanted to have a fun, friendly game. I lost every bet. After a couple of rounds, he asked if I wanted to go get dinner. Honestly, I kind of wanted to go home. But I was also starving, and he suggested Mexican, and we all know that tacos are the way to a girl's heart. Dinner was a little awkward, but I guess that's to be expected. I mean, you're complete strangers. You're sitting there face to face with no distractions. It's awkward. I had told myself early on that I would try to get some of the big stuff out of the way. You know, like weed him out if there were some like obvious incompatibilities. I have some hardline boundaries and ideals that I wanted to bring up early so that there was no misunderstanding of what I wouldn't tolerate. For instance, if this dude wanted to have kids in the future, that's a hard no from me. I am firmly and happily child-free. I'm a liberal, period. And if you're conservative, especially regarding social issues, we're going to have some fundamentally different ideals and morals. I'm atheist. I'm not going to go to church with you on Sunday, and that's not something I'm going to compromise on. I'm also bi. I've had relationships with women, and if you have a problem with the LGBT plus community, we're going to have a bad time. And for the love of God, don't be a fucking racist. He seemed to genuinely be on the same page as me for most of it, but there are a couple of things that I want to point out. When it came to political stance, he told me that he was essentially apolitical. He made it sound like he didn't vote, and he unfollowed people on Facebook whose entire feed was political banter. He said that he didn't like Trump or Biden and thought it was all divisive and pointless, and he didn't even like talking about politics. I can understand that, but that could prove a sticking point if he ever met my family, because let's be real, we like to talk about politics. A lot. I have volunteered for political campaigns in the past, knocking on doors, registering people to vote. I'm a member of a local progressive group, and we gather occasionally, safely of course during this pandemic, to socialize and talk about local political issues. We advertise locally for political candidates and issues that we support. So yeah, it could get sticky. I also learned during dinner that he has a preteen daughter. That part is not all that surprising for someone our age. I am under no illusion that being in my 40s, anyone I date is just as likely to have kids as not. But it was a comment he made about her that really made me prickle. He told me that she came out as gay a year or two back. He said, "I don't understand how an 11-year-old can know she's gay, but whatever." He said it so dismissively. Drink up, bitches. I clapped back immediately. I remember writing in my diary as a very young teenager about how I liked a girl in my school and how badly I wanted to dance with her at a party. But Andrew just kind of shrugged it off. Anyway, after our dinner, we went on a short sunset hike. It had just rained and the clouds were now gone, and we were even graced with a rainbow. It was really a beautiful evening, and I guess he saw it as a good opportunity to make his move. We stopped over the summit to look out over the city, and he kissed me. I didn't like it. It wasn't a bad kiss. It wasn't a good one. It was just kind of dull. All that said though, we had literally just met. Unless a first date is truly terrible, I will usually give it a 2 or 3 solid goes before hanging up my hat. Plus, we already had plans for the next day to climb, and I really was excited to try it. That was less about him and more about learning from somebody that already knew what they were doing. But regardless, I had no intention of canceling. And honestly, climbing was exhilarating. I legit had an absolute blast. I instantly knew that I would want to do more of it. The gym downtown was packed that day, and Andrew knew like most of the people there. It was obvious he was a staple at that place. So imagine my surprise when, in between our last climbs, he asks me to kiss him right in the middle of the gym floor. Now, I am not into PDA in general, but seriously, dude, I just met you the day before. I instantly felt like it was a production. I'm gonna get drunk before this is over. I felt like he wanted me to kiss him so that other people would see me kiss him. Gross. So why did I do it? I have no fucking idea. I felt pressured and put on the spot, and I was completely caught off guard. So I gave him a very quick peck, and I immediately pulled away. He smiled really big and told me I was glowing. Again, gross, gross. That is one of those words that I hate to hear, kind of like moist, glowing. Blech. And besides that, no, I wasn't glowing. I was hot and sweaty and tired. I was red from working out hard for the last hour and from embarrassment. Immediately, I told him I was beat, and of course, he offers to buy me lunch at the cafe in the gym. I was so put off by that nonsense that lunch was the most awkward thing I've ever sat through. Ever. We barely said 2 words to each other the whole time. And on top of that, I was experiencing like a severe adrenaline crash after all of the rock climbing. I could barely keep my eyes open. So I rushed through my food and I paid my own tab so that I could just get the hell out of there. I had parked like a couple of blocks away, and Andrew was parked right out front. So he offered to drive me around to my car. To say that I hightailed it out of his passenger seat was an understatement. He actually tried to kiss me again as I was getting out, and I pulled away and I made an excuse that my breath smelled like goat cheese from the salad that I had just eaten. As I was like rushing to my car, he rolled down the window and like yelled out the window, "Really? You're leaving just like that?" And I just yelled back, "Yep, see ya." And I practically dove into my driver's seat and took off. So yeah, that was awkward. This should be the end of the story, but of course, I'm fucking dumb. I spent the rest of the day all up in my head. I had no reason to feel bad about how I left, but I did. I felt like I had been rude, and I don't like feeling that way. I hadn't been rude. He actually had been rude. He had been out of line, but I was the one feeling like I'd done something wrong. And to be clear, he had not made me feel that way. I did. I was just all up in my own head, and I made myself feel this way. These were my own issues. So that afternoon, I sent him a text apologizing for leaving like so hastily, and I offered an olive branch in the way of a third date. I could tell by his short replies that he was really annoyed. But by the next day, I guess he'd gotten over it because he was regularly texting me again. And Friday night, I ended up going over to my brother's house, and Evelyn was super curious, of course, about how the dates went. And I was honest. I had fun, but I wasn't really feeling it. I told her about him being really small and how I was turned off by it, but how that also made me feel really petty. I didn't tell either of them about the red flags, but that's honestly because I didn't identify them as red flags at the time. I told her I was gonna give it one more college try, and that if I still wasn't into it after that, I'd call it a wrap. That night would be the last time I would hang out with them for almost 2 months. So that weekend, both mine and Andrew's original plans got shot. I was supposed to be hanging out with my brother, and he was supposed to be going rafting on the Arkansas River. But recent rain had blown out the river, so it wasn't safe for him to go rafting. And Rob ended up having contractors at his house, so I wasn't able to go over there. So of course, the obvious answer is go on that third date. So dumb. So dumb. 3 dates in 4 days. That's way too much. Regardless, that's what we did. I think my reasons for this were twofold. On one hand, even though I wasn't feeling much of a spark between us, I was still kind of relishing human contact after 3 years single and over a year in pandemic isolation. On the other hand, I was also not expecting anything to come of it. I told myself I'd give it 3 dates, and if I still wasn't into it, I would, move on. So I think I was just trying to get that final date out of the way and in the rearview mirror. We made plans to go on a hike at one of my favorite spots near my house. He lived about an hour away, so I suggested he just come to my place and I'd drive us to the trailhead. So we set out on our 5-miler, and holy shit, the floodgates opened. Now, Andrew was fairly quiet and reserved on our first 2 dates, but he was anything but on this one. He talked so damn much I could barely get a word in edgewise. He opened up about some deeply personal stuff, including his chaotic childhood and what must have been literally every single serious relationship he has ever been in. This dude never stopped talking, and he didn't stop for the rest of our relationship. This was also the first time that I noticed that he would repeat himself over and over and over again. As in, he would tell me the exact same stories, start to finish, several times just in that 2.5-hour hike. And in every story, he was a victim in some shape, form, or fashion. He told me the lengthy, in-depth story of how his last long-term relationship ended with her betrayal, probably 3 times that day. He told me about a girl he met on a dating app that he went on a single date with, and she showed up to said date with a hickey on her neck. Yeah, he told me that story at least 6 or 7 times on our hike. At the time, I thought it was kind of quirky and endearing. Like, let's be honest, right or wrong, women often feel that men have a hard time opening up and being vulnerable. So I mistakenly thought that his ability to be so open and communicative was a good thing. I know now that sharing these kinds of things so soon is actually a huge red flag. It's one facet of love bombing, and there would be other facets to come. But I personally had never experienced love bombing before, so even though I'd heard the term, I had no idea what it entailed. Love bombing describes a narcissist's over-the-top courtship tactics. They use these when they are chasing someone that they are trying to seduce or make fall in love with them. It's wildly romantic behavior that includes constant praise, promises of undying love, thoughtful little gifts, late-night texts, and anything and everything that the narcissist thinks will secure the love of the person that they have chosen. This intense positive attention is often accompanied by pressure for a quick commitment. Keep that in mind. This particular type of love bombing that I was experiencing is also an attempt to get you to open up so that they understand your background and what it is that you're looking for in a relationship. This allows them to transform themselves into your ideal partner. And the repeat stories, hallmark of a narcissist. They choose the same stories to tell over and over again because they can control the narrative. They choose which stories to tell so that they can be the hero or the main character. They choose which stories to tell so that there's no one that can refute their version of events. These stories really are just narrative. And later on, I'll tell you the true stories behind these works of fiction. But back to our 3rd date. After the hike, I was on an endorphin high, and I was also starved. Man, so many of my bad decisions revolve around food, don't they? Anyway, so I suggested that we go back to my place because I had stuff to make homemade pizza. We were both sweaty and gross because it was like really, really hot that day. I remember it being like a super hot day. So while I was prepping dinner, he asked if I would mind if he showered. I pointed him to the bathroom, threw him a towel, and we both took turns getting cleaned up. Then we ate dinner, and then we holed up in the basement for a movie. One thing led to another, and you know what? Single. 3 years. I ain't mad about it. But in that moment, I made a decision. I made a choice. I wanted to enjoy a summer fling and see where it would go. From this point forward, rather than following a timeline, I'm going to talk about things in more general terms and feelings, but with specific details on instances that gave me pause or were just entirely fucked up. Because there's lots. That third date kicked off what would be a summer full of excitement and adventure. While this is inherently a terrible story, it's not like the entire relationship was terrible. In fact, most of it, especially early on, was fantastic. That's how they suck you in. Things got progressively more concerning over the coming months, but in the beginning, I honestly had one of the best summers of my entire life. On the weekends, you could typically find us up in the mountains or out on the river. We went on several strenuous 10 to 11 mile hikes out in the backcountry. We went ATVing through hundreds of miles of public trails. We went garnet and arrowhead hunting, camping, whitewater rafting. We progressed from climbing only in the gym to actually rock climbing outdoors. I even learned to lead climb. And even during work weeks, we would venture out after hours to go bowling or hiking, taking our dogs, or we would go set up a hammock out at one of the local parks. I legitimately had an amazing, exciting, adventurous summer. But there was always an undercurrent of something more sinister. And I started to really feel it about a month in. Very early on, Andrew brought up how he felt it was a good thing that he lived so far away. He said that when people spend all their time together early in a relationship, it has a tendency to burn really hot and then fast and fizzle out. And he would rather it be a slow build up to a roaring fire. I couldn't have agreed more. I like my independence and my routine, and I was already nervous about the idea of someone just being around more and being in my space more. But a slow build up is decidedly not what happened. Even though Andrew lived an hour away, he was in the city for work every day, and within just 2 weeks, I was seeing him nearly every day. And it wasn't because I was initiating. The boy moved fast. He was constantly texting me, calling me, asking if I wanted to meet up for dinner or climbing or hikes after work. And while I was certainly enjoying the adventure and excitement, dude, I was exhausted. I was struggling to balance all of this new fun with work, and honestly, I was feeling a little bit smothered. He also started to get extremely handsy during this period. I'm talking, he would just walk up to me while I was in the middle of some task, like cooking or washing dishes, something where my hands weren't free. And he would just lift my shirt up and start grabbing at me. For the record, that shit does not feel good. It is not a turn on. Quite frankly, it's annoying as fuck. And when I sat him down and told him to cut that shit out, he got offended. It wasn't like he was angry, but he acted like I was denying him affection. That's not affection. That's straight up entitlement to someone else's body. I set a firm boundary on this, and thankfully that behavior stopped. Along with just his constant presence, he was making some pretty strong declarations of his feelings for me very early on. He talked about how I was exactly the kind of partner he was looking for. He'd list off all of these traits that I fulfilled, like I was just checking boxes. And he told me that he loved me very quickly. I remember thinking, there's no way he loves me. He barely knows me. I barely know him. Rather than asking myself if I loved him too, I was still asking myself, can I love him at some point in the future? Dr. Greenberg wrote, "Narcissists are so focused on winning you over that they speed everything up and increase the intensity. It's a bit like dating on adrenaline. Everything that a normal couple does in the course of a year, narcissists do after a few dates. Narcissists rarely stop to assess whether the two of you are really a good match. Instead, they use a variety of strategies in an attempt to get you to fall in love and commit to them before they have fully committed to you, even though they are telling you that you are the love of their life and their perfect mate. It is only after you are fully committed that they actually decide whether you are what they are really looking for. There was a ton of love bombing happening in the first couple of months, and it wasn't just the constant declarations of his feelings for me. There were gifts, there were acts of service, and there were constant reminders of all the little things he was doing for me. He repeatedly brought up how awesome it must be for me to have met him and him have all of the equipment and whatnot to take me on these exciting adventures. He didn't use those words, of course, because that would be too obvious, but there was always an underlying thread of, what would you do without me? Be just fine, motherfucker. Be just fucking fine. Anyway, Andrew and I talked about our love languages, and I had made it clear that gifts were not on my radar. I don't like receiving gifts, and I am terrible at giving them. And yet, throughout most of our relationship, he brought me gifts. Sometimes small, sometimes large, but there was always a theme. Much of it was climbing related, and Rob pointed out later that they were gifts intended to keep me interested in the things that he was interested in. It was also just annoying. These were things that I would have preferred to pick out myself. As silly as it may seem, I am particular about things like color and style, even for rock climbing gear. But that choice was taken away from me. There was no regard for what I might have actually liked. Speaking of love languages, he was pretty upfront that his love language is words of affirmation. I attributed the quickness with which he declared his feelings for me to this, and the fact that he didn't get much affirmation from his parents as a child. But it also made me feel obligated to tell him things that I didn't really mean. But let me explain why. He started doing this thing that drove me absolutely crazy. He'd say, "Tell me something." Let me resituate myself here. He'd say, "Tell me something." And I was expected to tell him some big declaration about how I feel about him. I'm talking many times a day, sometimes 15 or 20 times a day. Tell me something. Tell me a secret. Tell me something. And he'd say it just like that. I realize now that he was baiting me into making declarations of love to him to validate him and feed his need for what's called narcissistic supply. Narcissistic supply describes anything and anyone that narcissists use to regulate their self-esteem. The purpose of supply is to enhance the narcissist's sense of being special. At first, I was really careful to word my affirmations in ways that reflected what I really felt. But he made it clear that that wasn't cutting it. He would get frustrated and tell me that it was obvious that he felt more strongly about me than I did for him, and that we just weren't on the same page and he should just leave. It was really fucking dramatic. He would try to make me feel guilty for not working harder to give my partner what he needs. At this point, however, the good was still outweighing the bad, and I just wasn't ready to give up the adventure yet. Sometimes I would tell him random factoids about myself to be funny, which he did not take well. But other times I felt that I'd have to tell him what he wanted to hear just to diffuse the situation. I started cognitively realizing that he would get defensive and almost act insulted if I didn't reciprocate his feelings. Early on, I thought it was a quirk. Now, I was actively processing the fact that this was a toxic pattern. I wasn't feeding his need for supply. And if I didn't say exactly what he wanted to hear from me, he would scowl, huff and puff, and just shut down. He would either physically leave the room, or he would turn away from me and bury himself in his phone, giving me the silent treatment, a very common tactic with narcissists. By the end, I felt like I was walking on eggshells. I was never sure of what I should say. About a month in, Andrew first broached the idea of living together. Even though I knew how it would be received, I told him that I was not interested, that I liked him staying the night occasionally, but I still really believed that we should work towards a slow build, that we should limit our time together during the week. I reminded him that when we met, this was his stance too. I actually used this opportunity to open up about other things that were bothering me, how the constant text messaging was draining me. I'm not the kind of person that has to or even wants to be in constant contact. And it's especially problematic when he's incessantly texting and expecting a response when I am working. I even told him about how much I hated the constant tell me something interrogations. He argued with me at first, complaining that, this one's gold. He argued with me at first, complaining that he didn't even text me as much as he texted in his previous relationships. He texted with his ex from his previous long-term relationship all day long. The insinuation being that she must have cared about him more than I do. But ultimately, he acquiesced for about a week. I ended up giving him a drawer in my dresser and a toothbrush for when he stayed the night. In month 2, there was a bombshell. I don't think I mentioned this before, but Andrew had been in the Army for coming up on 20 years. He was up for retirement at the end of October, and in August, I learned that his retirement was in jeopardy. He came by my house one day after work, and he was just a bundle of nerves. I am talking, he was on the verge of a full-on breakdown. He told me that he needed to tell me something, and he started off by apologizing that he was having to bring something so heavy into our relationship so early on. Ready for this? He was being investigated for child and adult abuse due to an incident that happened as his last relationship was ending. Here's the story as he told it to me. Everything up until the fight I already knew about. He had told me the first part of the story about 100 times. Remember how I said he liked to repeat himself? But he had conveniently left out the abuse allegations. His ex, let's call her Sandy. Random, I know. Sandy had kids. I think they were like 9 and 11 or something. I'm honestly not real sure. He had told me repeatedly about how he treated those kids like his own, to the point where he took them to soccer practice, he picked them up from school, he toured new potential schools for them, and he even went to church with them on Sundays. Remember when I said that narcissists do whatever they can to portray themselves as your perfect potential partner? I'm still not really clear on how long they were actually together, but it was long enough that they were moving in together. Although, in retrospect, I guess that doesn't really tell me anything. She was in a situation where her lease was ending on her current place or something, and she wanted to move in with him. He made it sound like it was her idea. So he sold much of his own furniture to make room for hers, and he even remodeled some of his cabin and let her pick out the design and materials. He helped her pack up her house, and he physically hauled all of her stuff up to his cabin and unpacked it all for her once he got it there. Then, less than 24 hours later, she told him she'd made a mistake. I really wish that I knew all the other details. I wish I had her side of this story. I really do. So less than 24 hours after moving in with him, she told him she'd made a mistake. Remember, this is his version of the story, okay? She said that living so far away from the city, out in the mountains, was not what she expected, and she didn't want to stay there. Assuming this is how it actually happened, which I doubt, but assuming this is how it actually happened, he would have been understandably very upset, right? He moved her right back out, and they split up. So the part of the story that I was just now becoming privy to was that they got into a huge fight as he was moving her out. According to Andrew, it was just a verbal fight, but one of her kids got upset and started hitting him while he was carrying a large, wicker chair. He was yelling "Don't fucking touch me," which I know is true because Sandy recorded audio on her phone. But according to Andrew, allegedly, she was on the other side of the room. He was asking her if she was going to stop her kid, and she just stood there crying, saying, "He's just trying to defend me." Andrew said he yelled back, "From what? You're on the other side of the room." And so, okay, so you have to picture, this is the way he told the story to me. His cabin was tiny, okay, and he's carrying this big wicker chair that he's got his arms around like this. So he's carrying this large chair out of the room. The kid grabs the chair and is trying to pull it out of his hands. Andrew lets go of the chair. The kid is pulling, and the kid goes flying backwards, falls, and starts crying. End of story. At least according to Andrew, that is the end of the story. That's all that happened. Over the next week, Sandy allegedly tried to keep their relationship alive. She was texting him love letters and asking him to go on a date, to which he agreed. The night before their date, however, she went radio silent. And remember, they texted constantly. She was not responding to his messages all evening. So when they went out to dinner the next night, he asked her about it. He said that she was obviously lying about where she had been the night before, and so he told her that night that he couldn't continue seeing her because he couldn't trust her. The next day, he got a knock on the door from the police. You see what story he's trying to set up here, right? Right? Scorned woman. So the next day, he gets a knock on the door from police. Andrew pointed out several times that Colorado is a mandatory arrest state, and that is true. In Colorado, law enforcement is required to make an immediate arrest in cases where they believe there is probable cause that a crime related to domestic violence has been committed. He was not arrested. Personally, I don't think this is surprising. It was a week after the incident. But I also read a copy of the police report. Sandy stated in the report that she did not want to press charges and that she didn't want anything to negatively impact his military career. Andrew's explanation was that she had vented to a third party about the fight, and that third party was a mandatory reporter. That third party is who he believed had actually contacted the police. However, at some point, Sandy must have changed her mind. Now that the Army was following up on this case, she wanted him taken down. And I know that that part is true. Over the next couple of months, I listened in on several of his conversations with his lawyer, meaning Andrew put it on speakerphone so that I could listen. Sandy was absolutely planning to testify against him if this went to some sort of a trial. Bottom line though, I believed his version. He did an excellent job of selling a story that made sense, that made it seem like she was a scorned lover trying to get revenge. There is much more to this story that I learned later, and I will get to that eventually. But at the time, I cautiously believed him. There are a couple of other notes I want to make here too, though. One thing I picked up on throughout the entirety of this process was that he did not trust his lawyer. He believed he knew things about the law and Army regulations that his lawyer didn't. And his lawyer was a Reserve Army Lieutenant Colonel on the civilian side, specializing in military cases just like this. It was so fucking strange. Like, how fucking self-absorbed do you have to be to believe that you, an uneducated twat, knows more about the law than a practicing military officer with a law degree? On top of that, Andrew had multiple other lines of communication open with other lawyers for second and third and fourth and fifth opinions. There was also like one particular conversation with his lawyer that just struck me as off. Prior to that call, I had literally told Andrew he needed to just shut the fuck up and do whatever his lawyer tells him. In those words. He hired this guy for a reason. Let him do the job that you are paying him to do. So during the call, he mentioned to his lawyer that I had said that, and the lawyer cut him off and said, "You have a girlfriend?" Andrew just replied, "Yeah." And the lawyer just sat there in silence for a minute before continuing on with, "Well, okay then."
It was a really strange response, and it definitely raised my hackles a bit. There was another revelation during this whole debacle too. So this last volatile relationship that I thought had been over a year before, it had just ended at the end of April. April! As a reminder, we met at the end of June, just 2 months later. So this relationship with a woman that he had said he loved and was serious enough with to move in together just ended in April. Yet here he was just a few months later proclaiming his love for me and that I was his perfect partner. Okay, whatever you say, dude. He also called me by her name several times throughout this. Just saying.
Near the end of August, with the exception of a couple of concerts, I had pretty much dropped off the face of the planet, at least from Rob and Evelyn's perspective. I had spent the last 3 years hanging out at their house every single weekend, but now I was spending every weekend out adventuring, usually in areas with no cell phone service. It honestly wasn't intentional. I wasn't trying to hide Andrew away from them or anything. It was more like, well, think about it. The only people I'd spent any time with for the last 3 years was family. I love them, and they're my best friends, but it's not like we were doing anything adventurous. We ate food and watched movies. Between the pandemic and the fact that it's just not really their thing, we didn't get out to experience the world. And before that, for a lot of my marriage, it was much of the same. The only time we ever really got out of the house was for the occasional concert. So for nearly a decade, I had felt kind of like a recluse. So yeah, I was indulging. I recognize now that none of this had anything to do with Andrew as a person. It was more that he had all of the tools, toys, and the knowledge to go out and do these things. I had fun with him, definitely, but I likely would have had just as much fun doing these things with someone else or even by myself. Regardless, by this point, Rob was getting pretty concerned. So on August 25th, Andrew and I had plans to go to the climbing gym after work. But near the end of the day, Rob sent me a text asking if he could come over to my house or if I could come over to his place. He said that there were some things that were bothering him, and rather than let it eat at him, he wanted to just sit down and talk face to face. Of course, I agreed. I chose to go over to Rob's because Andrew's dogs were at my place and I was expecting him to stay the night that night. So I texted Andrew to let him know that I had a change of plans, and I told him that I needed to go over to Rob's to deal with some family drama. He asked me if everything was okay, then said that he was going to go ahead and go to the gym, and then he would make his way back to my place later. The conversation with Rob was awkward. I mean, it was about exactly what I expected. The fact that I'd not been coming over anymore, and the fact that I spent all my free time with Andrew. I was ignoring my friends and my family that have always supported me. They were worried that I was slipping into old patterns like what had happened with an abusive ex from nearly 15 years ago. I tried my best to explain that that wasn't the case, that honestly I was just having an amazing summer. But I didn't do a very good job of articulating it at the time. I didn't admit that Andrew was far more emotionally invested than I was, even though now I think that would have actually made Rob feel better. Because Rob definitely didn't believe me at the time. He does now, but he has admitted to me that he did not believe me at the time. After we got done with the talk, there's no way I could have just bailed because I wanted to go meet up with Andrew, and I didn't. I wanted to hang out for a while. So when Rob asked me to stay for dinner, of course I agreed. I finally packed up to head home around 8:20 p.m. And this is where shit gets wild. At 8:30 p.m., I get a text message from my best friend Tammy, who is in Kentucky. Yo, your dude is worked up. You should text him. Not sure what's going on. You and Rob okay? Kids okay? You okay, Ray? I'm caught slightly off guard by him reaching out to me, upset. What? I told her that I had been at Rob's, dealing with a little drama, and was just like, what on earth? She texted back, you're also having drama with your man, and you are unaware. He's upset that you bailed on him and left him at your house and it's your last date night and he's about to leave and so on and so on. And I keep trying to say something must have happened and Rob needs you. He thinks they hate him. It's a whole thing. Is Rob okay though? Like, your dude is sending me screenshots of your texts. I'm so confused. Hashtag red flag. And I'm like, screenshots of my texts with him? Like, I hadn't even been texting him while I was over there, so I didn't even understand what he would have been sending her. And keep in mind, he does not know Tammy. He's never met her. He's never talked to her. It was fucking weird. So when I got home, Andrew wasn't there. I checked my doorbell camera, and he intentionally left right before I got there to go walk his dogs. Pouting much? Jesus, what a fucking drama queen. I'm about to start getting angry, so just FYI, there's gonna be a lot more unintentional cuss words, because I can't help it. Tammy and I texted back and forth a bit longer while I waited for him to get back. And we ended the conversation with her saying, the fact that he messaged me upset at you, but didn't text you is so odd. Like, bro, I'm on her side for everything forever. Don't get confused. I love my tribe. Love my tribe. And they are a tribe. If you've never heard of the manipulation tactic called flying monkeys, definitely go look that one up. Flying monkeys are the slang term for any group of people that the narcissist enlists as allies to persecute someone. To gain their support, the narcissist makes up lies that portray the other person as evil or in the wrong, and the narcissist as the real victim. They'll even try to get to your friends and family, especially mutuals if you have them. And I can see how this would work for someone with a large group of friends, or more like acquaintances. But that's not me. I have a very small, very bonded friend group. That shit's not gonna work on my friends, because they're not just my friends, they're my family. My tribe is strong. Anyway, back to the story. So I sat down on the bed, waiting for him to come back, and I was absolutely seething. When Andrew walked in, I tried my best to remain calm, but his response did not make that possible. What resulted was an absolutely outlandish fight that lasted 2 fucking days. At first, I just asked him why on earth he reached out to my best friend instead of just texting me. And he got pissed at Tammy for telling me. Andrew got pissed at Tammy for telling me that he reached out to him. Like, what the hell did you expect her to do? She is my best friend. What did you expect her to do? He flew off the handle. This was the first time that I experienced narcissistic rage. He started yelling at me, saying he was worried about me because he hadn't heard from me in hours. What? And, dude, we've been dating for 2 months. I told him I was having some family drama and I would be at Rob's. He said that he assumed that I would be an hour tops and that we would still be meeting up for dinner. Well, I guess you shouldn't make assumptions. And if you have questions, you should just ask. He was going on about how rude I was and some nonsense about how if we were having such deep conversations, then why was Rob on Facebook the whole time? Dude, what? You're like stalking his online status on Facebook? What the fuck is wrong with you? Then he started whining about how he had to eat dinner alone, and if he'd known I'd be home so late, he would have just gone back to his cabin. And again, I ask, why didn't you just ask me? For someone that likes to text so much, maybe pick up the phone and send me a message. So then he started going into how he just knows that I was going over there so they could talk shit about him and that they hated him. I'm gonna be picking up the red flag a whole bunch right now, okay? Yeah, I'm just gonna be waving it constantly. At this point, they had never even met him.
Like, what on earth are you even talking about? I started getting like really heated at this point, and I was completely unable to control my tone. I wasn't yelling, but I was 100% getting snarky. And I flat out told him, this isn't fucking about you. Now that I'm thinking about it, that was probably like the perfect thing to say to a narcissist. This isn't about you. I mean, but seriously, it was about me and my patterns. I explained to him that they were concerned about me because of the familiar pattern they saw when I was with the abusive ex. But then I told him that, quite frankly, the way he behaved over the last several hours made me feel the way the abusive ex made me feel. It was triggering. And that's when he lost it. Absolutely lost it. He started screaming about how I was an asshole, how I was calling him an abuser, and how I was being mean to him. The entire fight was suddenly my fault, and he was turning on all the gaslights, all of them. It was my fault that he had to reach out to my best friend because I ditched him on date night. Side note, since when is going to the gym date night? But I digress. I didn't communicate with him for hours, and he got worried about me. It was completely reasonable for him to reach out to Tammy, my best friend that he'd never spoken to before. And if Tammy had just done what he'd told her to do and not told me about their conversation, we wouldn't even be having this argument right now. Yeah, he said that. To top it all off, he thinks he should just leave because I am not the kind of person that he thought I was, because I was making false accusations of him being abusive. Oh. Once again, I could not get a word in edgewise, and every time I tried to explain what I was feeling, he just cut me off and told me I was an asshole. And with that, he stormed off to the bedroom and started to throw his few pieces of clothing he'd brought over into a bag. I was completely fucking dumbfounded. What on earth just happened? Now, to be fair, I haven't experienced gaslighting in, man, a long time. I was super confused and caught off guard by what had just happened. And when he started leashing his dogs up to leave, I kind of panicked. It wasn't that I thought that any of what happened was okay. It was more that I just didn't feel like anything had been resolved. And I didn't want to leave things like that. I hate leaving things unresolved. So I did the only thing I knew to do to get him to pause and take a breath. I apologized and I asked him not to leave. He asked, why should I stay when I made him feel so unsafe? Second side note, the fucking gall. But I am a stubborn woman. I was gonna get resolution on this one way or another, so I told him the truth. I don't fight like this, period. I talk about things calmly and rationally, and I can't stand going to bed angry. It worked for the night. We agreed to go to bed and talk about it more reasonably the next day. The next morning, he had to be on base before I even woke up. So I was mostly able to work in peace throughout that day. After work, we ordered some takeout and we decided to sit out on the front porch and talk through things. He asked for a few minutes to make some notes first, which I thought was weird, but okay. You can't just speak from your emotions. You have to like write it down. Okay, whatever. Our conversation on the front porch lasted maybe 5 minutes before he got out of control again. I thought this would be an opportunity to talk about my feelings since I didn't get to the night before. But he apparently thought this would be an opportunity for him to tell me all the ways I fucked up again, even though I made the effort to apologize before bed and he did not. As soon as I started opening up, he lost it again, turning everything back around on me, making it all my fault. He got up and stormed inside. By this point, I was just exasperated. I rolled my eyes and followed him in, and next thing I know, he is again hauling his clothes out to his car, dramatically proclaiming that he's leaving. And then he comes back in and gets his dogs and their crate. In the meantime, I pulled out a dining room chair. I aimed it towards the kitchen window and I sat my happy ass down, crossed my arms, and watched his dumbass load his car. As soon as he realized that I wasn't chasing after him, he stopped. I watched him pace back and forth outside in that driveway for at least 10 minutes, and eventually he came back in and very sheepishly asked if we could just start over. Yeah, okay. We'll just start over. Motherfucker. So I just pursed my lips at him and shot him a look that said, go on. So he suggested that we just go for a walk. Just us, no dogs. We walk and we talk and we don't come back until we've come to a resolution. Okay, I'll try it. The oddest thing about all of this is that the walk and the resulting conversation was actually really good. He gave me space to talk. He acknowledged my feelings. He said he understood why I felt the way I did and how his behavior made me feel that way. He told me about how he was feeling. He agreed to handle things differently in the future. He said all the things that I needed him to say. He admitted that he's an anxious, insecure attachment style. I am a secure attachment style. And that one of his habits is storming out while secretly hoping I'll chase after him and stop him. I admitted that I lost my cool the night before, and I apologized for that and for leaving him hanging, even though I didn't really feel like I left him hanging. But he accepted my apology. Spoiler alert, he didn't really. It would come up again in the future. We made a pact that if we had any major disagreements or scary things that we needed to talk about in the future, we would try this method first, the walk and talk. I honestly felt so much better at the end of it all. We survived our first fight, right? I set firm boundaries and I was very proud of myself. And while I did have alarm bells going off through the whole thing, I felt like he had reasonable explanations for it all by the end of it. And I genuinely felt like he would make the effort to respond appropriately in the future. But one thing was for sure, if he ever raged at me like that again, done. I am not doing this.